Black, Director of the Office of Postdoctoral Services, and I'd like to welcome you to our panel discussion today on non-faculty careers in academia. I'd like to begin by thanking our panelists, all of whom are very busy people, for taking time out of their schedules to join us this morning. We really appreciate y'all sharing your advice with our postdocs and graduate students. So our panelists are Sherilyn Black, the Director of the Duke Office of Biomedical Graduate Diversity. Sherilyn has her PhD in neurobiology. Next to her, Elizabeth or Zab Johnson, the Associate Director of the Duke Institute for Brain Sciences. Zab has her PhD in neuroscience. And Donna Costeux, Academic Dean for Trinity College. Her PhD is in immunology, and she used to teach in this very room, she was telling me earlier. And Jory Weintraub, the Assistant Director of Science Education and Outreach for the National Evolutionary Synthesis Center, otherwise known as NESCENT, and he also has his PhD in immunology. So I'll ask the panelists to introduce themselves briefly and fill us in on their backgrounds, and then we'll start with the questions. Many of you submitted questions online. Thank you for doing that, so we'll start with those and then move to questions from the audience. So, who wants to start? Sherilyn? Jory? You're on the end. It doesn't matter. I'll start.
Why don't you go?
Okay, fine.
So, like Molly said, my name is Sherilyn Black. I went to graduate school here, got my PhD in neurobiology, and she said for us to keep this to about 2 minutes. So, I guess the best way for me to start out is by saying, I feel like probably towards my 5th year of graduate school, I started reaching that Bermuda Triangle where I felt like, I didn't necessarily see myself having a career in academia, but I wasn't sure what else I wanted to do. But I didn't hate lab, but I didn't love lab. I was just sort of in that neutral zone where I was just, felt like I was kind of flailing around trying to figure out the next step. So I decided that I would go on because my research went very well and I was getting offered postdocs. I lined up a postdoc and was actually planning on moving and starting a postdoc. And then for me, the way I came to this job is that the chair of my thesis committee, Donna Costeux, became the Associate Vice Dean of Research for the School of Medicine. And she had several initiatives that she brought with her to that position, and one of them was that she was going to start an office that focused on promoting diversity in the sciences at Duke, and that is ethnic minorities, women, disabled students, things like that. And so Donna called me into her office and said, I've worked with you for several years, research-wise. I think that you have very strong communication skills. I think that you're very organized. I think that there are certain skills that you possess that would make you a very excellent scientific administrator. And I had never considered this for a career, ever. And I'm being dead serious, I'm not just saying that. I really thought that I would probably end up doing a combination of research and science writing or research and maybe science education, but I never thought about academia. And I was really torn because I already had a postdoc lined up, and so essentially she offered if I would direct this office, they would still give me a research appointment and allow me to do research at the same time. So I decided to try it for a year and see if I liked it. And I mean, to Donna's credit, she could see things in me I could not see in myself, and I really, really love this job. It doesn't feel like work. I love it. I do science every day. Basically what my job consists of on a daily basis is I work with a combination of student activities, grants acquisitions, program development, and sort of overall science PR and Duke PR between Duke and NIH and Duke and other institutions, really trying to broaden the conversation about diversity in Duke's science programs. And for me, it's been very rewarding, and I would definitely say one small piece of advice before we move on to the next person is what Donna told me is when we were having the sort of pivotal meeting about me taking this job, she said, everyone that's in your class is going to graduate with a PhD. You'll all have the same degree. What you have to figure out is what separates you from them. And she said, there are people like Mike Ehlers and Eric Jarvis and these other people who just sort of flow into research, and it's obviously very natural and intuitive for them. But there are obviously other people who are doing science and are good at it, but it's just not something that they're really passionate about. And she said that if you take your PhD and combine it with talents that you personally possess and exploit those talents, you can end up having a very fulfilling career using your PhD in another way. So I would say that was something that was very important to me and sort of leading me to take this job. So I know we're going to do question and answers later. I can do more detail about my day-to-day life, but that is basically what I do.
And I'm Zab.
middle three letters of Elizabeth. And some people ask me questions about that. And I got my PhD at New York University. And then I came here on a very traditional postdoc path. But I came to Duke, to the medical center, to the Department of Neurobiology, which is how I know Sherilyn's, and was a postdoc, very traditional postdoc going for an academic position. I recognized in myself during that trajectory that I didn't want to be part of a medical center, that I sort of was more enamored with the arts and sciences side of things, which is how I got my PhD. It was in an arts and sciences division. So I had already recognized that there was already something else, sort of applying pressure to me in my academic route. About a year and a half after I had started my postdoc, I decided to go to a meeting of the Duke Postdoc Association, which might have been a huge mistake, or it might have been the door that opened the Pandora's box. I don't know. But I went and I actually said something out loud in the group, and apparently that was startling for a first timer. And I sort of built a reputation from that point on. A colleague of mine, when she left to take her faculty position, she was the communications director in DUPA, and she said, "I think you should take this over for me. I think you would be great at it." And I said, okay, I'll take the honorific. And I took that and started doing that sort of on the side. And about 6 months after that, the president of DUPA left to take her first faculty job and sort of anointed me as the president because there were only 6 people at that point, so the pickings were rather slim. And I didn't really have a choice, but I sort of gladly took that on and sort of made it my mission to sort of expand out what DUPA was doing. One of the first things that we did was actually open the Office of Postdoctoral Services and hire Molly. And then right as we did that, we got involved with a huge task force to devise the first postdoctoral policies, which I'm sure you have all read back to front. But just to let you know that took more or less 3 years of solid work. And in the last year, before the first iteration of that formally came out, we were meeting weekly, once a week. And I had to get a universal parking pass so that I could get to all the places and park. But in the midst of that, I met almost every central administrator at Duke. Because at some point in time during the postdoc policies, I had to meet. We had to sort of work out how that would work. And because I was really representing the postdocs on the whole and trying to get as much equity out of the whole process, that's actually how it started, by the way. It's not to be a policy for the sake of policy, but to actually build a system where Duke would be fair. Central administration started to learn that I had this other talent, which was sort of negotiating and sort of what I say is the 25,000 foot view of what it's like to be a postdoc and a scientist at Duke. And I also learned that was something that was really interesting, sort of get out from under the microscope per se and sort of look at things on a more holistic measure. And sort of like Sherilyn, I also had another thing fall in my lap, which was that my current postdoc advisor, David Fitzpatrick, ended up being the first founding director of the new Duke Institute for Brain Sciences. And the first piece of advice that he got from another leader on campus was bring in someone who's really familiar with everybody on campus because you don't know them. And he said he spent about 2 minutes and he said, well, that's Zab. She knows everybody. And so he asked me to come on board as the assistant director of the Institute. And it was right at the point when I was on the job market for a faculty position, and I thought very long and hard about it. But it was also really an exciting time to sort of build an institute from the ground up. And so I went for it, and that was exactly 4 years ago. And now we're in the second director. I get to work with a new director now for the Institute. I'm now associate director, which is something that I can talk about how that whole thing transpired a bit later. But I'd also like to repeat what Sherilyn says, which is that I still feel like I'm a very active scientist. I think that's something that is important, and it's something that I negotiated very hard for, because I think it makes me actually a better academic administrator to be still quite involved with what I do, and I'll tell you more about what I do when we get to that point.
Sounds good. Hi, I'm Donna. It's nice to see you all here. My graduate degree is in immunology from Duke. I graduated from an undergraduate school in Ohio, didn't know what I wanted to do, got married, had 2 kids, came down here to Duke with my husband, took the first job that was offered, which happened to be in immunology, and really liked it. It developed into a long-lasting passion, and I eventually went to graduate school here, finished a short postdoc, and then stayed on as a faculty member for a number of years. And so I have to say I was really happy in those days. The department was sort of new. It was thrilling and exciting. Everyone worked on the field of histocompatibility and transplantation in one way or another. And I wrote papers and grants and went to meetings, and along the way I got involved with undergraduate students, and so we always had undergraduate students in the lab working as volunteers. I mentored them for independent studies. There was a Howard Hughes program that put undergrads in research labs for the summer, and we often had students doing that. One year I had a high school teacher work with me during the summer picking up new techniques. The department and my own interests at that time were in engagement and education and in outreach, and we did a lot with that. So obviously I'm still not in research, so what happened? So there were 2 things that came about. First, funding got more and more difficult to get. We had a 5-year contract with NIH. After the second year, they decided that they were tight on money, so they stopped it. That was sort of reverberating. And it was hard to predict where the funding was going to come from. The second part was actually the department. The department changed. All departments change. People come and go. At the very end, I was the last person in the department working in HLA on histocompatibility. Everyone else had moved on to other places. I had a husband and kids here, and I didn't really want to move. And I had collaborators in other parts of Duke and outside this university, but it's not nearly as much fun when you're the only person working in an area within a department. The synergism, the excitement, the enthusiasm had really sort of waned. And so at that point, my kids were mostly grown by that time, and I thought if I was going to make a change, that was the time to do it. So for several years, I had been advising undergraduates on a volunteer basis. And so I contacted people that I knew and said, I'm changing jobs. If you hear of anything, let me know. And they said, yes, there's an assistant director's position open in the pre-major advising center on East Campus. It was to work with freshmen and sophomores who are pre-majors coming into Duke. And I said, gee, that sounds really fun, because I'd already been doing part of that for a number of years. And so I sent in a letter and a resume, and I got the job, and I've been there for 10 years. And I have to say that I have liked this job as well as I liked my first job. It has been rewarding and exciting. Every day is different. There's a real sense of reward in working with undergraduates and youngsters who are still trying to figure out what they want to do in life. And I still do science. I'm one of 16 deans who oversee the undergraduate student body in arts and sciences. And the knowledge of science and immunology has made a difference. I advise on courses in science. I help students sometimes with problems in classes. I'm better able to give advice to students because I've done research myself, and when they say, what does research entail, I can actually tell them. So it has been a lot of fun, and it's been very rewarding, and it's worked out well. So I've actually had 2 really good careers that I've enjoyed tremendously.
Thanks. So I'm Jory Weintraub, and I work at NESCENT, National Evolutionary Synthesis Center, which is right down the road in the Irwin Mill building, sort of between here and the East Campus. I'm guessing most of you are more biomedical, is that correct? Any evolutionary biologists here? So you've hopefully heard of NESCENT, yeah? So my background is I had an undergraduate degree in biochemistry from UC San Diego, and graduated from there a long time ago, and did not want to go right into grad school. Knew that I wasn't really interested in that. Didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I did what a lot of people with bachelors in biology do, which is I worked as a lab tech for a few years and sort of figured out what I wanted to do. And I worked with enough PIs and postdocs when I was a technician after undergrad to find out that that wasn't the career path that I wanted for myself. I just, not that there's anything wrong with that path, but it just wasn't for me. So I knew I didn't want to be a PI and run my own lab. But I did enjoy doing research, and I really was drawn towards education, science education, and wanted to do something with teaching. But I wanted to be able to do it at the undergraduate level. So for me, getting a PhD was more of a means to an end, which of course I did not tell the people when I was interviewing for graduate positions. Oh, I really want to do research, yeah. But my intention all along was really to get a PhD and sort of find a way to transition over to more science education, science outreach types of things. And so that's what brought me to North Carolina. I went to the other school, UNC. Any Heels fans here? Probably talking to the wrong crowd. But so I went to graduate school there in the immunology program, and I really enjoyed the program. I really enjoyed the research, and I had a lot of fun, and I liked asking the questions I was asking in the lab. But partly that was because I knew that I wasn't going to be doing it for the rest of my life. And while I was in grad school, contrary to almost everyone else in my program, I tried to seek out as many extra teaching opportunities as I could. So anytime a professor needed someone to do a guest lecture in their class, I would sign up to do it. I always tried to take extra, teaching lab courses and things like that. And I also, just sort of out of the blue one day, I was walking across campus at UNC, and on a whim, just walked into the Center for Teaching and Learning, which is an office that's there primarily to support faculty and helping them teach more effectively. And I just knocked on the door of the director and introduced myself, and he was so shocked to see someone who was a biology graduate student who wanted to teach and liked teaching that he welcomed me into his office, and sort of over the next few years he became one of the best mentors I've ever had. Ed Neal, is anybody?
Yeah, he's awesome.
Amazing guy, and he was an academic who had sort of dedicated his career to helping people teach more effectively and to the scholarship of teaching and learning. And so he sort of gave me this mentorship in a career in science education and teaching while I was still working on my PhD in immunology. So I sort of had this dual life. And fortunately, I had an advisor who was very supportive of that. So those of you who've been in a situation of trying to branch out beyond research and have advisors who aren't supportive of that know how difficult that can be. But fortunately, I was not in that situation. So I finished up my PhD at UNC and just sort of happened to be in the right place at the right time, and found a postdoc opportunity right there in biology at UNC to do science education. So it was with someone who was a biology professor who was sort of shutting down his research lab and focusing more on science ed. He brought me on as a postdoc, and most of what I did there for several years was I taught undergraduate courses at UNC and developed new courses while also running a minority outreach program, outreach to underrepresented minorities. And that I discovered was really my passion. And so that's what I've continued to do to this day, is really focus on not only science education, but particularly reaching out to underrepresented minorities and trying to make science more diverse. And then about 6-7 years ago, this opportunity came along at NESCENT, which is an NSF-funded evolutionary biology research center. And I had no background in evolution at all. So I thought, I'm not qualified to do outreach at an evolution center, but I figured, what the heck, evolution's always been a really interesting topic to me. I might as well apply. And for whatever reason, they decided to hire me to do the job. And it was really cool because, it's pretty rare that, so Donna mentioned having sort of two careers. In a way, I feel like I had two careers because I had a career in the biomedical sciences, teaching and doing outreach in that area. And now I've been plunged into this world of evolutionary biology, which is completely different in so many ways, the NIH world versus the NSF world, and sort of molecular, cellular stuff versus organismal stuff. And it's really different, but it's been really cool to learn a whole new sort of sub-discipline of biology for me. I feel really privileged. But I, like everyone else on this panel, I love what I do. I really enjoy going to work every day. I never, 20 years ago, if you had told me what path will you follow in the next 20 years, I never in a million years could have come up with the path that I followed. It was very random in a lot of ways, but it's gotten me to a point where I have a job that I really love. And so, so I feel pretty fortunate.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Those were great introductions. So it sounds like a lot of you kind of had this experience where you sort of found yourself, or you feel like you found yourself in a position where somebody offered you the job. Are there recommendations you can make to current postdocs and graduate students about how they can position themselves similarly for a similar type of career?
Well, I could definitely say, you probably already know this, but I hadn't really thought about it in an organized fashion, but truly, I was being evaluated at all times leading me up to getting this job. I just didn't really think about it that way because I was just thinking, I'm just doing my research, I'm giving talks, I'm involved in university activities, and I had no idea that that body of work was sort of culminating in Donna looking at me and thinking that I was worthy of directing a new office for the School of Medicine. So I would definitely just say that everything that you do publicly in your department, just make sure it's always at your level best, because you never know when someone's watching you who could potentially have an opportunity that they could offer you. And I think that a lot of times it's easy to sort of partition off looking for a career with the current research that you're doing. But I think that if you try to always consciously be aware that people might have opportunities, it can definitely be helpful.
And I think starting to again, if you're interested in administration, I think it's really valuable to have the sort of 25,000 foot view, and to keep that. Getting involved with a postdoc association is a great thing, or part of the student government if you're a graduate student, would sort of start to give you. Of course, that's my own experience, but it does start to network you out. The research lab can be a really small place. And so even if it's just something where you get involved with something programmatic in your department, or bringing speakers in, as a graduate student or as a postdoc, that kind of like organizational thing, I think those are really valuable. I think teaching, getting involved with teaching, volunteering to do that, not just seeking out employment areas for that. Anytime where you can sort of volunteer, people start to build, it builds loyalty, it builds a reputation for you, like seeking that out as something that's important. And because it's true, I think you have to be in the right place at the right time a lot of times for these kinds of positions. Although they do crop up, people will want to see evidence that this is something that is actually really important for you. And that would be like that. I think that would be my final piece of advice, which is that I evaluate a lot of people who are applying actually to be part of our institute. And I can tell you that when I see PhDs on the CVs and resumes, and we go ahead and interview you, what I want you to really convince me of is that you're ready to sort of leave the bench, or if you decide that somehow you can cost share yourself, that this is something that you're doing not just because you want something else, because the academic market is hard, but it's something that you will love, and it's something that you'll really enjoy doing day to day, that you'll put all of your effort into, and that you've sort of come to a self-understanding about your motivations. And I don't, it's hard right now. Faculty positions aren't out there. I don't want to hear people who don't want to write grants, because you're going to write a grant if you come and work with us.
Yes.
And so those kinds of things are reasons not to go into academic administration, because you often get involved in larger scale projects, and you certainly have a chance for not being at the highest level, which might be, a faculty member directing, or the provost, or and you have to be okay that you're sort of part of a supporting engine to make something work.
Just to add a very short piece to that, what she was saying about the CV, so I also have to hire people and interview a lot of people and look at a lot of resumes and CVs, and I think, I definitely get a lot of people that come to my office who want to work for me who say that towards the end of graduate school they realized that they didn't want to pursue a career in academia, and they decided that this is what they want to do, but then and there are a lot of people who say my boss was not supportive of me doing things outside of lab, and that's why my CV is pretty sparse outside of my publications. But that's why I do think volunteering is really important, because there just has to be something to show. Like if you have a PhD, you obviously are an intelligent, competent person. It's more about convincing somebody that you can adapt the skills you used in lab toward doing science in another way. And that's the thing that you have to sort of learn how to communicate and learn how to effectively sort of get across, because obviously, like Zab said, I didn't have any experience in this at all. And if somebody had been looking at my CV, I did do, similar to Zab, I was very heavily involved with a lot of things outside of lab, but I do think that there are probably many of you who could also be excellent administrators as well. It's just a matter of being able to convince the person that's hiring that you have the necessary skill set to adapt to using science in another way. So volunteering is something that you can do off the clock, outside of your PI, where you can get that experience and at least have something to speak about in your interviews.
In terms of practicality, if you wanted to go into the academic side where I am, what would you do? All the deans currently have extensive teaching experience. We all love to teach and have done it in a number of ways. So the more teaching that you can do, you can organize a course, give guest lectures, if you can supervise TAs in a course, grade papers, assign grades, figure out who the students are in your class, where they're coming from, what kind of requirements that they're trying to complete for the class that you're teaching. All these things will give you some idea of what the educational environment is at the university or medical center where you're working. Mentoring undergraduate students, watching over independent studies, those are things that can be done within the lab setting, but I think you can go even farther than that. There are committees at Duke. If you find an area that you're committed to and interested in, join a committee. If you are interested in education, go and volunteer in one of the local school systems. I have a neighbor who's an ex-Dukey who works one morning a week over at Lakeville Elementary helping kids learn to read. There are a lot of service opportunities within the community, and Duke supports a lot of those as well. So that's within the lab, that's the Duke community, that's the local community. At the national level, if you go to meetings, be sure that you do posters and presentations. Get used to communicating with people. Join national committees if it's possible. I was on a publications committee and a standards committee for a number of years, and what it allowed me to do was to get experience, but it also let me network. And one of the individuals I worked with eventually gave me a reference. And so as you start to do these kinds of experiences, it's not just so that you can put something on a white piece of paper that's your resume. Because when you do a resume for an education job, the amount of research space is about an inch, in the bottom. But you also need to show accomplishments, sustained interest, experience, knowledge, and then you add references. And those references will not always be the lab PI. It will be people that you run into in education where they've seen what you've been able to do, in different areas. And so the networking that comes along with these experiences is, to me, really important. And oftentimes your jobs will come from word of mouth and not from formal applications.
So everything that they said, yes. And I'll just add one thing to that, which is sort of reiterating what I said in my intro, which is don't be afraid to go for things that you think might be, you might not be qualified for, or to reach beyond your comfort zone a little bit. Like I said, I had zero background in evolution. I never even took evolution as an undergrad. I mean, I had never had a class in my life. I shouldn't say that so loud. But so, you know, on paper, I wasn't an evolutionary biologist or even close, but I had a lot of experience with minority outreach, and that was a priority for the people at NESCENT when they were looking for someone to do outreach. Was they really wanted a strong presence in minority outreach, and so by virtue of that, I was qualified, and they thought, at least. And you also need to think about how to spin. If you're not on paper the ideal candidate for something, you need to think about how to spin yourself as more uniquely qualified because you have a different background. So, you know, I think a lot of times it's pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone, trying for things that you may not think that you have a chance to get, or things that aren't a perfect fit. But you never know what that one thing will be that will give you your first foot in the door. And you know, it's always like anything else. It's that first opportunity that gets the ball rolling for everything else. So you know, do push yourself beyond, outside of your comfort zone a little bit.
Okay, questions from the audience at this point? Okay, can you talk a little bit about job stability, job salary, how that would compare to traditional academic jobs or otherwise?
So, you know, obviously, the job is, for me, is just as stable as any job would be, which is that you don't know, right? What you want to do is go to work every day, do your best, and life is uncertain, but it always is. And I don't think that there's anything less stable about academic administration than any other work right now. But I don't sort of see anything dissolving. I think I have enough notice to know, as long as I was doing my work as to the best of my ability. As far as salary, this is also my advice to Sherilyn when she was in the midst of her decision to take the job. Don't undervalue yourself, and don't underestimate what the university or would assign for your pay scale. What I told Sherilyn is that you don't do a postdoc to make $1 bazillion. You do a postdoc because it's a step, and you're underpaid for your qualifications. Everybody knows that, and you do it because it's a stepping stone. It's a required stepping stone, often to a lot of other work, whether that's going to be in industry or in academia or in journalism or wherever you're going. And so accepting an academic administrative job with a postdoc salary or something that's a little bit higher than a postdoc salary is not to your benefit, because this is the beginning of the trajectory of your life. You can think of this as not a stepping stone, but as the next real professional, your first real professional phase, if you're coming to it from a postdoc position rather than a faculty position. And don't undervalue yourselves. That said, there are lots of faculty positions that will pay more, especially in a medical center, especially when you have the flexibility of paying yourself off of your own grants. That's the mechanism that works. There is a cost function to that, because you have to get those grants in order to pay that salary. In academic administration, your salary is fixed, right? You can negotiate a situation where you could potentially supplement that based on any grant work that you would have outside of that. But you might not be making in the same trajectory if you were a tenured faculty member in a school of medicine and you had 3 R01s, you would be making more money. I'll just be perfectly frank about that. But for me, it's fine. It's comfortable. It's more than comfortable, and it's something that I think is of value. So.
I think as far as the stability question goes, I did a short postdoc with my PhD advisor before I started my next postdoc, and the reason that postdoc ended was because funding ran out. I mean, you guys all can relate to being in situations where grants have finite period of time, finite period of funding. So one of the things about this that I really do like is not having the pressure of thinking that I have to apply for money to be sure that I have a job. Like, it allows me to just do my job without having to worry about that. And that's actually one of the reasons why when I was looking at postdocs, I was planning on, I had already gotten a position at NIH, because for me personally, I just didn't like having as much of the pressure of constantly having to get funding for my own research. I just wanted to do research. So I think that's probably a personal thing too. I mean, some of you might not mind that nearly as much, but for me, that is one of the aspects of this job that I really do love, is that it's hard money from the university. It's not based off of a grant. I have money. I can just do my job. And I think for me, I really appreciate that part of administration.
So there's good news and there's bad news. in my part of academia, the bad news is it really doesn't pay very much. It pays fine, but it doesn't pay what you would get in a normal medical center on a research, as a faculty level research position. I'm in the university. A couple of years ago, they tightened their belts. No one got any pay increases. The next year, I got a promotion and I got a 3% pay increase. You don't do it for the money. It's adequate, but it's not tremendous unless you're really up at the very high levels. But the rewards come in different ways. It is hard money. It is a guaranteed job. I can't imagine them getting rid of me for any reason unless I did something truly egregious and insulting to the university. It's nice knowing that I can think about my own personal development over a period of years, where this year I'm teaching, next year I want to get involved in this. I make contributions to the university and to students, and I can do so with the security that this job is going to continue. And that's really the good part of it. I think that it is also a transportable career. If I had a husband who moved to New York City, I could probably find a similar job with the experience that I've got, and I could probably even move into community colleges or other kinds of institutions, or into administration with the kinds of background that I have. So it's a lot easier to move in terms of a PhD than an actual tenure track research position.
Yeah, we all live in this weird fantasy world where we're told that tenure is this gold standard, and that's what we're all, is that carrot on the stick, right, in grad school as a postdoc. And yeah, it'd be nice to have a guaranteed job for life, but look at the real world all around us outside of academia. I mean, I have a lot of, most of my friends aren't in academia, and they think we're insane that we expect to get a job and have a guaranteed job for life. So where I work at Nescent, we got a 5-year grant from the NSF to get us started in 2004. And that was renewed, and we had a pretty good sense that we'd be renewed. We weren't too worried about it. So that was renewed for another 5 years. So that's 10 years right in the meaty part of my career where I really haven't had to worry about a job, which I'm not saying that's going to happen for all of you, but for me, it's been, that part of it's been pretty comfortable. I haven't had to, I've written grants, but I haven't had to bring in my income because we had this pretty generous funding from the NSF. And my friends in academia are struggling like crazy to get tenure, and my friends in industry are always living in fear of that pink slip coming. So, none of us go into science to get rich, but I've had what I've needed, and I haven't really had to sweat my income much for the last several years that I've been in Nescent. So I've been pretty content with that.
I should add something about lifestyle. So when I was in research, and my kids were growing up, it was convenient. I could set my assays up, if I wanted to come in at 6 o'clock in the morning and watch volleyball games at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I came and went as I needed to do so. I worked weekends, I worked nights. I remember writing a review at 2 o'clock in the morning for weeks on end. But it was really sort of 24/7. The current job that I have is more like a 40-hour work week. I go in at 8 o'clock, I usually leave at 5. There are times when I work till 6 or 7. Sometimes I do things on, I happen to like working on Saturday mornings when no one else is around. And I always check emails because I have students emailing with funny questions in the middle of the night, so I check emails late at night. But in general, it's really a different lifestyle. I no longer read 10 journals, cover to cover every month. And I think about other parts of life and other kinds of education, and I think about what's going on in the world. So to me, it has been a very nice change in that the stress and the fury and the anxiety and the compulsion to do things in research, has pretty much disappeared. And I have other challenges, but they tend to be more in teamwork and dealing with unruly parents and students. Other kinds of things. It's a change, but it has been a nice change.
And thank you for bringing that up, Donna. That was one of the questions, the work-life balance. How do you guys find that in your positions?
I'm interested to hear it too, 'cause I'm working on that one.
I completely agree what you just said. I mean, I just by nature tend to sort of be a workaholic, so I actually was going through periods of guilt when I first started this job because I will definitely say though, I still work way more than 40 hours a week, unfortunately, and I don't think that's ever going to change, largely because I direct the office, so everything is on my shoulders, but I would say for me it's been easier because so I can work from home a lot more with this job than I could with lab. Also, a big part of this job is that I have to travel because, like I said, I do a lot of PR and give a lot of talks on behalf of Duke's science programs, and so that part of it sort of necessitates that my home base is not necessarily in an office working, but that I can be more mobile with my approach. So I feel like because that's the dynamic of this job, it's easier because I can sort of fit it into my life, and it's not like I'm on the time clock I was when I was running experiments every day and I had to be there at a certain time to start it and stop it. It's more like, I have to have this conference call, which I could do anywhere, or I could, host a meeting virtually or do whatever I have to do. It's sort of more fluid, I think, in that way. But I probably work as many hours. It just doesn't feel as stressful. Like I don't know how else to describe it. It's like I said, it doesn't feel like work. It's fun. I'm talking to people, and I don't know. So maybe actually I'm not doing a very good job of work-life balance because I am working as much, but I feel a lot less stressed than I did when I was doing science full time. So.
I also work fairly long hours. I have 2 small kids, and it's still. I mean, it's always. I think that's a constant struggle. I mean, if you have a lot of things pulling you in a lot of different directions, and the sort of modern problem of always having access is always there, yes. And people do expect that I'm reachable at any hour. And part of that is sort of emergency control, But I would say I would sort of also emphasize with both Donna and Sherilyn that it's still a more traditional work week. I can leave at 5 and I don't feel a lot of stress, but I know that I'm probably coming back to work after my kids go to bed from home. But there's more flexibility, I think, probably like there probably would be in a faculty position where you can leave for an afternoon to make sure that you're at your kid's pageant or whatever it is. Pageant? I don't know. No, not the beauty pageant. But I have boys, so it's not an issue. Not yet. One of the biggest differences I think for me mentally was that I actually have hard and fast deadlines, which you just never do in science. Yes. And that's the thing that I think used to probably bother me the most was this idea that your deadline was writing the paper, was sort of like putting the work together and feeling like you had enough to generate a paper. But even that was this open-ended thing that's like there were still extra questions, there was still other stuff, and so you were in the shower and you were thinking about that extra stuff and you were doing all these other things. I get to approach my world as like there are some deadlines that I know are just hard and fast, and sometimes that's really stressful because I have a bazillion of them all at the same time. But then they're over with and I leave them behind. Like they don't cloud my thoughts in the shower. Like it's it's the next set of things. And I have to say that there was something very great about getting to a point where you're working on discrete projects that have absolute deadlines, and that those are things that you can sort of let go of once you complete them. So.
Yeah, I'm still working on the work-life balance. I'm a single parent of 2 teenagers, so between that and work, that's all I do. I mean, my life is my kids and my work, and fortunately, I love my kids and I love my work, so it's a good life, but there's not a whole lot of time for anything else, and that's just the reality. But you know what, I mean, that's just life, right? You're going to go through periods in your life where you just don't have a lot of spare time to sit on the couch and watch Beavis and Butthead, unfortunately. I wish I had that, but you know, that's just life, and I think the key is, like I said, I really love my family and I really love my job, and so I'm very busy, but I'm very busy with things that feel really rewarding and fulfilling. And I think that's my personality. I think there are people who, no matter what job they have, are going to be able to balance it in different ways than I do, and they're going to find that key. But I think that has more to do with the type of person you are than with the career path you choose.
Questions? Yes.
My question is to Donna. So do you think if we are interested in like advising or working with undergraduates, it still will be a good idea to get like a grant established, show that we can do these things and then move, or?
I think it depends on the circumstances. If you are interested in science and research and you have a position and you want to write a grant and you want to do this for a couple of years while you develop your undergraduate experiences, then that's great. That's an easy stepping stone. If you said, I don't want to do grants anymore, I don't want to write papers anymore, I really just want to move into education, then you need to assess how much experience you have and look at the jobs that are open and then see if you can move directly into one of those. I think it's a series of stepping stones. A lot of times you'll start with something that is, I wouldn't say it's a lateral move, but a change in the job description wherever you can get in an entry-level position, if it's in academic advising, if it's in a dean of students office, Res Life, a career center, in an office of undergraduate research support, some place like that where you're involved in education. And then once you develop a set of skills and accomplishments, then you start to move up and move more perhaps in line with an academic dean or advising. I think it depends on how much experience you have at this point.
And you just touched on a whole range of jobs that are available under the Student Affairs umbrella. So, Residence Life, what else was there?
Res Life Career Center. We have a Duke, there's an academic resource center that works with undergraduates extensively on study skills. They do some disability issues. There's an Office of Research Support. Depends on the university and how it's organized, but there are jobs out there. You can go to the Duke Human Resources, and you don't have to apply for jobs. You don't have to look to see what's open. There are just job descriptions, and they'll say academic dean, and you can see what is involved in the job category. And usually it'll say 7 years experience. You think I don't have 7 years experience, but sometimes they'll take less. But it'll give you an idea of the jobs that are out there and what they might be looking for, and if this is the kind of job that would appeal to you. And then you look to see if you can get experience in those areas.
The other thing I'll just add to that is a lot of times, even if you apply for a job that you don't get and you're not the best candidate for that job, it gets your name and your CV in front of the people that are running these organizations, and they may have a position that they haven't advertised yet, but you're perfect for it. Or they may see your skills and think, wow, that's really interesting. Maybe we could create a position that would use their skills. So again, it comes back to my point earlier about, it never hurts to try and to push yourself and to, extend beyond your comfort zone, because you don't know what doors will open. But you know that if you don't try, it's not going to happen.
Other questions?
A couple of you mentioned something like, I still do science in my career. What do you mean by you still do science?
I still actively do science. I have a dual.
Literally have a research lab.
Yeah, but with that being said, and I'm laughing because some of the people who I work with are back there. The balance is horrible. I do 80% administration, 20% of time doing experiments. I mean, for me, literally at this point, it is me wanting to keep that part of my life fresh. Like I didn't feel like I could close that chapter. Like I still had ideas that I wanted to explore and things like that. But I think it's pretty clear that the direction my career is going in is that I'm not going to be a PI. So it was more of a part of my negotiating package because I still just wanted to do experiments, but it's not necessarily because I'm trying to cultivate the skills to actually run a lab and do this. I don't think that's possible, unfortunately.
And I agree, and I'm another person who negotiated to stay doing experiments, but I do it under, in somebody else's laboratory, and I never expected to try and negotiate for my own space, and I certainly don't have enough time in my day to do academic administration on the level that I do and run a lab and have people. But I can mentor undergraduates and graduate students, and I like having the academic freedom to do that. So oftentimes I design experiments that other people can run, and then I can amalgamate that. But for me, it was important. It was especially important because I didn't really talk about what I do, but a lot of what I do is programmatic, and we're a virtual institute. We have people that are spread out all over campus. Sort of my job is to try and help facilitate interactions, bring people together, and familiarize myself with what everybody does. And so a lot of what I do is just on-campus networking, like figuring out who the best person is for doing something, and then basically trying to facilitate a handshake, whether that's at a workshop or a seminar or whatever. I also need to be a go-to person for faculty. So faculty need to come to me when they have an idea about something, or they're looking for a collaborator, or they're looking to try and put together a program. And they respect me more because they know that I'm still engaged in my field. And so I can still give scientific presentations at national conferences. I just don't do it at a scale where I expect that that's going to be my life, So I sort of had to scale that back, and that it's probably again like 20% of my time. But there are projects that I know are sort of keeping me abreast of techniques, and that makes me better at bringing people together, because I can say, this is something that's really current, and this is a hot subject area, and it's not just from this sort of, it's not from a removed status, but it also, for me, I'm a scientist. Part of the reason that I love my academic directing is because I do it in my field, and that's something we didn't quite get to. But I think about, I think a lot about positions that would take me outside of my field, and I know that I would be less happy doing that. And part of what I love about it is that I'm still engaged in my field. And so I still needed to sort of have that part of me. It just didn't need to be driving 150% of my time. But I don't think I would be nearly as happy and content just standing back and doing administration without a piece of me that it was still involved in research. And that could have been on the teaching side of things too, and that may morph over time. But I needed, and I do a lot of outreach. Those kinds of things are really engaging for me. So science in a broad context.
I was also going to add too, from a practical standpoint. So I think one thing about Zab and I's jobs, especially being here at Duke, is that traditionally most people get into scientific administration after they've run a lab for like 10, 15 years, and then they end up doing nationwide searches and they appoint you. We both were very fortunate in that we were able to come into this much earlier in our careers. So on the one hand, if you do it later in your career, you already have a lab established where, sort of what she was saying, you can direct other people to do your science. So you can still run a lab, as some people say, oh, I have a lab in this and I'm the dean of this, but because of the stage of our careers, we're sort of still stuck where we have to sort of self-guide most of the research that we want to happen. And that is a harder part about doing administration earlier instead of later. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people that I know either decide they're only going to do administration or they're only going to do science. But it obviously can be done. It's just a little bit trickier to sort out. If you choose to do administration earlier in your career, just knowing that you might still have to guide more than you would if you waited to do it later. So there's just a pro and con.
And I also want to say that for the first 2 years, I signed a contract that said I would not be at the bench. And that was mandated by Duke Central Administration because they wanted to make sure that my boss, who was actually had been my postdoctoral advisor, wasn't just trying to offload his spending, his grant spending, in a different mechanism. And part of that was just because we were building this thing from the ground up, and nobody had any expectations of what it was that was going to happen. And part of it was that they were really surprised that he wanted to hire me. Even though they knew me and they were familiar with what I did, I sort of had to go through a point of proving myself. And so part of that was just that they wanted to make sure that I was dedicating my time and energy to making this thing work. So I actually used that to my advantage. And so when that 2-year contract expired, I had built myself to be so valuable to the Institute that I knew my own value. And so I both negotiated to get back into research and have that be something that the central administration would support. But I also knew that my contract was expiring and I had more leverage, so I negotiated for a raise at a time when raises weren't happening, and a change in title at that point too. So sometimes, mandated contract terms can actually be used for your advantage.
And a really good parking space.
And a really good parking space.
That's right. Talk to her about negotiation.
So I stopped by research entirely, and I use science in terms of science advising. I oversee the progress of 800 undergraduates each year. About a quarter of those are pre-med students, and I do pre-med advising for those students. I tell them what courses they need to take, what med schools are looking for, why they need to take physics, which biology courses are most important. I get questions about Duke offers 5 different kinds of stat courses. Which one would be most applicable to them? What kind of research experience they could get. And then we have in-house discussions about science courses, organization. There's just everything that comes out. And the fact that I have a background in science makes me very useful in terms of covering areas that other deans are not familiar with. And actually, when I was hired, it was partially because of my science background. Everyone else in that group at the time was coming from the humanities, and they didn't know a math course from a physics course. So it worked out well.
I'm not a scientist anymore. I mean, and that's by choice. Like I said, I wasn't interested in keeping any sort of a research career going. I mean, I need to be scientifically literate, obviously, to do my job. But I'm interested in science. I love it, and I would be reading Science and Nature even if I weren't doing the job that I'm doing now. But I definitely don't have a research career going. Everything I do is more on the service end of the spectrum, which is exactly where I want to be. I guess I'm fortunate in that I never wanted to pursue a career in research, so I never felt torn or felt like I had to make a choice. And I know for probably a lot of you that's not the case. You're probably sitting there saying, well, I really love research and I really am interested in these other things and I don't know what to do. And so I don't have answers for you because I felt like it was sort of easier for me because I was able to follow the path that I really wanted to follow. But I don't, every now and then I'll pick up an immunology journal, but I haven't even been working in the field of immunology in 7 or 8 years. So you know how fast all of our fields move. If you don't read journals and stay active in research, you're going to just lose a lot of that. When I was teaching undergrads, I was able to keep up with it a little bit more, but now mostly what I do is I focus on outreach and work with minority students, and and I love what I do. So again, I think it's sort of a different path for everyone depending on what you personally want.
Great. Thanks very much. We're out of time, so let's thank our panelists. May be able to stick around if you have any questions that you want to ask them one-on-one, but thanks very much for coming.
Thank you.